This is very, very subtle, and it's designed to create division. And that's, again, exceptionally difficult. Even cyber attacks, they're exceptionally difficult to actually physically pin the blame on someone, and takes an awful lot of effort to do that. So, it's almost considered as noise in the background, but it's very costly noise.
So, Philip's Sergei Narishkin talked about an increase in military activity by France, Germany, Britain on the Russia and Belarus border. Hasn't given details or evidence. In a scenario as Ukraine is sort of currently, is that the sort of thing NATO members would be doing?
Yes, of course there's an increased activity as we're seeing the negotiations for this coalition of the willing. And there's an awful lot more military activity happening on the NATO borders with Russia, with Belarus, and elsewhere as the threat from Russia increases. But it's not being done in an offensive or a preparation for offensive way. It is purely defensive. And we also have to remember that some of the Russian drone attacks that there have been in Ukraine, the drones have strayed across NATO's borders. So there will be an increasing air defense bubble that's there, just to make sure that we are staying ahead of any potential threat.
So this is accurate, but also sort of Russia spinning it in the way that they do.
Yeah, it's Russian deliberate disinformation. The Russians have got a doctrine called maskirovka. I love that word, and it's all about masking. It's all about trying to spin things in a way, as we see in our politics day to day in this country. But it's spinning something for an effect, and they use that all of the time. And this is almost certainly what this is.
Narishkin says that in response, Russia is preparing to take what he calls preemptive measures. Let's be blunt with the question, shall we? Is Vladimir Putin planning an attack on NATO land?
Well, I think we've had preemptive measures whenever the West provided support for Ukraine, and then whenever tanks were going to be given to Ukraine, and then whenever air defense missiles were going to be given to Ukraine, and then whenever F-16s were going to be given to Ukraine, and I could go on, and it's never turned into anything. The Russians are threatening. What they're trying to do on the overt side of the information domain is to create this threat in the minds of people from a political perspective, whilst underneath that, they're trying to find any way that they can to manipulate people, to create further divide, to create further political discourse, and to try and hamper any collective decision to bring a coalition of the willing, including Europe and the UK, together.
So you're saying it's not come to anything in the past, but what are these preemptive measures? What are the sorts of things that Russia might be thinking about doing, planning to do, whatever it might be?
Well, there'll be nothing overt military. They'll increase their number of against NATO countries. They'll increase the number of attacks against Ukraine, so the Ukrainians will suffer. But what they'll do is what they've been doing the whole way through this, and before this conflict, is in the grey zone, as we describe it. So they'll be continuing their cyber activity. They'll be looking for opportunities to disrupt in that. They'll be, in particular, increasing their activity in the information domain, especially if you've got elections coming up, but also to try and create division between the United States and Europe, the United States and UK and Europe, and within Europe. And of course, we've got the local elections coming up. So anything that will focus UK central government onto things that are causing it headaches and not able to focus on international geopolitics, it'll do it. They'll influence other things around the world. They'll influence what's going on inside Gaza, what's happening in Israel. They'll influence what's happening in Southeast Asia. They'll influence what's happening in Africa. Anything to try and distract our governmental capability from focusing on Russia.
If they are sort of having these attacks, not necessarily military attacks on the regular, do you think then that this now will be an opportunity for an escalation then within NATO, whatever the attacks that you've been talking about are?
It will be, but the Russians know where that escalation will come from. The previous Secretary General of NATO turned around and said that a massive cyber attack could constitute an Article 5 attack. The Russians know that. They came out with another threat whenever that happened in the same way. So they know what to do. They'll just ramp up what's in many commentators describe as below the threshold. So it's something that will not automatically trigger a national or a multinational response, but it will still cause massive disruption. We're getting better at spotting it. We're getting better at mitigating it, and we're getting better at doing exactly the same back to them.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of preempting some of my questions. I want to dig a little bit more into sort of how strategic those attacks are by Putin, this below the threshold thing, because, I mean, Article 5, as far as I'm aware, doesn't specify that an attack is only in terms of bombing or boots on the ground, as it were. So, A, how does he know what level he can go to without invoking Article 5? And B, would that threshold ever change? Where is it at the moment? Where is that threshold?
Well, the threshold is in the eye of the beholder, so it's the political beholder. And that
Who decides that?
It's the NAC. It's the different contributing countries to NATO. So you've got the formal definition, but it's up to a country that has been attacked to examine that attack and decide whether it's gone over the threshold and call an Article 5 response. It's only happened once in NATO's history, and that was the 9/11 attack on the United States, and the Americans called for an Article 5 response, and there was an Article 5 response when NATO came together to support the United States. Now, that was a physical attack by a terrorist organization, but you could have similar sorts of casualties caused by cyber attacks on a critical national infrastructure or other things like that. How does Putin know? He's been doing this for years. This is ramped up through the Cold War. He understands NATO. He understands the political decision making, and actually he's got an open goal at the moment because of the diversiveness that there is between different countries as they're working around. We've got a president of the United States who's very unpredictable. We've got France, who is in a very difficult political position at the moment, so can't really do anything. We've got Germany that's still trying to form a government. We've got the UK that has come out of the EU and is still trying to work out where it sits between the United States, Europe, with Brexit, and has got its focus on lots of other different areas. We've got different conflicts around the world. So Putin's going, I'll stir a little bit here, and I'll stir a little bit there, and I'll do a little bit of this, and all of it is so low. But you add it all together. It's a good old Chinese proverb of a death by 1,000 cuts. No one is going to cause any real harm, but add them all together, and it's causing you real difficulties.
And there was a report recently by the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, a think tank, suggested the number of attacks by Russia nearly tripled between 2023 and 24 and had quadrupled between 22 and 23.
Yep.
I'm wondering how much more actually Russia can ramp things up on these attacks within NATO.
Well, it's Russia ramping it up with its own internal capability, and it's got more capacity to do that. It's very, very good in the particular cyber domains and in the information domain, and it subcontracts a lot of stuff out into cyber criminal groups that are out there. But it's also bringing this coalition, the CRINC group together, so China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And it can subcontract work out into North Korea to attack bits and pieces, the Chinese to help, the Iranians to help. So they're looking at opportunities of increasing the volume of what they're doing. Of course, technology helps as well. So we'll see much more generated by AI and generative AI, and that gives an additional capacity that even back in 22, 23 didn't exist, and that's growing exponentially. So the sky's the limit at the moment.
In that case, might any of this, do you think, impact America's view on Putin and Russia? I mean, it's one thing attacking Ukraine when we know that Donald Trump has, an interesting view perhaps on Ukraine without wanting to put too fine a point on it. But it would surely be, even with his relationship with NATO and the spending of the fellow members and all of that sort of stuff, it must be surely in his mind another thing if Russia ramps up attacks of whatever sort on fellow NATO members.
It could do, but what they could do is reinforce what Trump is trying to achieve and reinforce some of Trump's negative messaging against Ukraine, negative messaging against EU capability to support Ukraine and all the rest of it. That is directly attacking the democracy inside the United States by spinning what Trump's doing and magnifying it out to different audiences without Trump necessarily seeing it as an attack on the United States and coming from Russia. So a lot of this is very, very subtle. and it's designed to create division. And that's, again, exceptionally difficult. Even cyber attacks, they're exceptionally difficult to actually physically pin the blame on someone, and takes an awful lot of effort to do that. So, it's almost considered as noise in the background, but it's very costly noise.
I might be making an assumption here, but you must still be in contact with lots of people within NATO. Is there division within NATO, or is this just about, citizens on the streets, as in voters?
Yeah, it's about both. NATO is an alliance of different nations. Each nation has got its own sovereign political path that it's going down. Those paths change every time there's an election. And therefore, there are always divisions in NATO. But that's one of the strengths of NATO, that you get so many different views. And NATO as an organization tries to work with those divisions, build on the strengths, and make sure the weaknesses don't come in to try and disable NATO from a collective perspective. So we use those differences to our strength. We recognize where things are being influenced, and then it's educating not just the military forces, but the military is an arm of politics. Warfare is diplomacy by other means, and therefore we identify these threats from a military perspective. We get them in and hopefully educate the different politicians that are coming through to the threats and how they can counter them, how they can deal with them. Yes, NATO is frustrating at times to work with, but it's probably one of the best coalitions that there's ever been when it comes to providing a collective defence.
And just finally, what is the strategy then within NATO for countering these attacks, and how adaptable are they? I mean, are they constantly analysing the best route, as it were, forwards, or do they tend to go, well, if Russia does this, then this, and if they do that, then that?
Yeah, there's constant analysis going on from a NATO perspective, and providing the intelligence behind them out to different NATO countries. But each contributing country is analysing what's happening to that country itself, and their security agencies, their intelligence agencies are providing advice to the politicians as to how they should react from a national perspective. But then when it comes to an international perspective, different protest groups or political parties that cause real difficulties in different countries will have their messages magnified, whether they know about it or not, to try and create division. We've seen AfD in Germany, we've seen Marie Le Pen's party in France, we see Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's magnifying all of these groups to try and create that division, that political division, and that's a national issue to deal with.